It's nice to see everyone present this morning. Maybe I'm starting out in a negative way, but I'm going to say something in a negative that might startle you a little bit. Today's sermon is not going to be a feel-good sermon. It's going to be a responsibility sermon. We'd rather leave the place feeling good than feeling responsible sometime, you know. The topic is the stewardship that you and I have concerning the grace of God. It's a difficult topic because we don't understand stewardship. We think more of managers and we think more of workers and things like that. But the idea of stewardship as revealed in the first century, not only the first century church, but the first century culture was very, very important. And we want to kind of transform ourselves for a few moments back into the first century and try to see exactly what would they have seen in this idea of stewardship. It's an interesting word. It's a compound word. It's a compound of the word orka and another word nemo. You put it together, orka means house or household, and nemo means a manager or a trustee or someone who is caring for somebody else's property, and he is therefore responsible for the other person, to the other person for his managership. So this is the idea. Stewardship is you and I as the administrators, as the managers, as the trustees of everything that is around us. That means I'm a trustee of myself, of my money, of my talent, my time, of my assets. I don't own them, folks. They ain't mine. They belong to God. And somebody says, yes, but I worked for it. It's mine. Yes, you worked for it. It's yours. But it's only yours as a trustee. Because God gave you life. God gave you energy. God gave you ability and talent. God gave you time. It's God's. I am God's. That's really hard for me. I don't know about you, but that's really hard for me. Because when I go to a ball game, I remember that I am the trustee of whatever I paid for the ticket. Now, yes, He gives us all of these things, and basically He says, now you can live off of my assets, but remember, the assets are my assets. I want you to use my assets for my benefit. Now, that's God's message to us about the whole idea of stewardship, the idea of being a trustee. See, I told you you're not going to like this. I don't like this. When I was preparing this sermon, I remember saying to myself, this is really bad. You know, as I was thinking through it, I couldn't help but think of what an enormous responsibility that is for me to belong to God. For all of my assets to belong to God. And He says to me, use them. Use them for my benefit, God says. So let's take a look at the meaning of stewardship and the meaning of this idea that was read to us a moment ago. We are stewards of the manifold grace of God. Two really important words here, folks. Manifold, many, multitudes, multiplied. We are stewards, we are trustees of the many gifts of God. The word for grace is a very interesting word. The word is charis, and it's the word that we get charisma from. The word charis means gift or bounty or abundance. It even means beauty. And so he says, God gives us many things. abundantly. Gifts. Gifts from God. Acts 17, verse 25. Paul is speaking to a bunch of philosophers at this time. He's on Mars Hill, and he's talking to a bunch of philosophers, and they were pagans. And Paul says, God is not served by men's hand, as if God needs anything. And then he adds this, he says, for he gives unto all life and breath and all things. All things. It's all his. That's the idea. In James 1:17, every good and perfect gift, you can say that, can't you? Is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation, neither shadow that is cast by turning. Every good gift comes from above. That's pretty all-inclusive, I guess we might say. All of my accomplishments, whatever they might be, all of my bank accounts, not very much there. All of my assets, I've got a little bit, and all belongs to God. Stop and think for a moment. It's strictly hypothetical, but just stop and think for a moment. What if the whole world viewed God and their possessions and their accomplishments that way? Hey, there wouldn't be any such thing as selfishness. There wouldn't be any such thing as arrogance. There'd be so many things that would be done away that we unfortunately have to live with. But of course, that's really not the way our world is. But I'll tell you this. Changing it begins with me. Changing it begins with me. I can't change you, you can't change me, but I can change me. You can change you. And that's the idea here. This just incorporates so much that it's hard for us to comprehend. There's a statement in the 59th Psalm that I really like this thing that was written. I remember the first time I ever heard this. By the way, I was a grown man before I remember hearing this. But in the 59th Psalm, God says through the psalmist, he says, I don't have any need from a bull out of your stall or a goat from your pen. For every animal in the forest is mine. The cattle on 1,000 hills, they're mine. I know every bird in the mountains and all the creatures of the field, they are mine. And then Jesus added to this a statement that even the hairs of your head are numbered. You see, we belong to Him. That's a tough thing for me to really get in my mind, that I belong to Him wholeheartedly, every bit of me, the whole works. I am only the manager of His assets. Well, this means personal responsibility. When I was a little kid, and you probably have heard this many times too, but when I was a little kid, there was a little rhyme that they had us say in church. It said, if everyone in this church were just like me, what kind of church would this church be? Now that's a masterpiece. If everyone in the church were just like me, what kind of church would this church be? Would it be a vibrant church? Would it be a dead church? Would it be an evangelistic church? Would it be a self-centered church? What kind of church would it be if everyone was just like me? When I abdicate my responsibility, I do it to my own peril. And it's so easily done. You see, personal responsibility demands that I make a commitment. Not a commitment of what I want, not a commitment of my desires, but a commitment of me. That's the idea, a commitment of me. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 7. Serve wholeheartedly, as if you were serving the Lord, not men. Now, I took that a little bit out of context. Now I'm going to put it in the context. You know what the context was? Slaves and masters. Speaking to slaves, he said, serve your master. Serve your master as if you were serving the Lord. Why? Because it belongs to Him. I belong to Him. Colossians 3:24 has the same thing. Paul admonishes slaves to obey their masters. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Those things are pretty heavy, folks. Well, the second thing is there is accountability. Responsibility and accountability, they're very close associated, and they have a dependence on one another. There's a story in the 16th chapter of the book of Luke that is very important along this line. Jesus tells a parable. Once upon a time, there was a very wealthy man, and it had been reported to him that his trustee, his steward, was wasting his goods. He called the steward, and he said to the steward, hey, it's been reported you're wasting my goods. Give an account of your stewardship. Give an account of your stewardship. If we just let that get inside of us, that gets to be pretty heavy, folks. Because God is demanding of all of us responsibility and accountability. Come face to face. Don't blame others. Well, I did it because, well, you know, this goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve committed their sin, you know. God appears on the scene and says, what's going on? Did you eat of that tree? Well, Adam said, this woman you gave me, she's responsible. She gave it to me. I didn't take it myself. She gave it to me. And the woman said, well, if you hadn't let that serpent get in the garden, it never would have happened. And so ultimately we can come back and blame God for almost everything, and a lot of people do that. Why did God make the world the way He did? Why doesn't God do something about the evil that's around us? Why doesn't God do this and this and this and this? We can find all kinds of reasons, excuses, when we lose sight of the fact that the buck stops here. I am the one responsible. And consequently, I am the one who has to give an account to God. I have to come face to face with who I am, what I have done, why I have done it. Not only must I say I take the responsibility for it, but I must in fact do so. There's a story in the Old Testament that's very, very interesting. In 1 Kings chapter 20, Elijah was the prophet at the time that Ahab, a very wicked king, was the ruler of Egypt. Of Israel. And all kinds of things were going on. Ahab was doing some terrible, terrible things. And so Elijah disguised himself. He covered up his face and just his eyes sticking out, you know. And he knew that Ahab was going to come along that way. And as Ahab came along, Elijah said, King, I've got something to talk to you about. And he said, I was given charge of a prisoner in the war. They captured a man, and the guard who put me in charge of him told me, he said, if he escaped, it's your life, or else you're going to have to pay a talent of silver, which was about 75 pounds of silver. And then this fellow said, but King, I was busy doing this and that and the other thing, and the guy got away. The prisoner got away. What is my sentence? And the king says, you've already told what your sentence is. And then Elijah ripped off his disguise, and he faced Ahab with this subject of responsibility and accountability. You see, sometimes we get so busy with this and that and the other, that we lose sight of the fact that, hey, I am a steward. I am a trustee of God's time, of God's money, of everything. By the way, I went to the internet and looked up how much is 75 pounds of silver. How much is it worth today? Almost $41,000. Now, I may have miscalculated that a little bit, I don't know, but that put it out of my ballpark anyway. But the whole thing is that in that story and in my story of my own life, I find some of the same things taking place. Folks, I want to talk about 3 areas of personal and congregational responsibility. First of all, I am a steward of my time. I have 24 hours in a day. I say 8 of those hours belong to my boss, 8 of those hours belong to my sleep, and 8 of those hours belong to me. No, 24 of those hours belong to God. And that's the whole thing. My time is not just limited, my time that belongs to God is not just limited to the time in a Bible class, time in worship. All of my time belongs to God. I can neglect that. I can forget it. I can give excuses why. But I'm still responsible for how I use my time. The next thing that we're responsible for as stewards is that we're stewards of our talents. When I look out into this audience, I see a wide variety of people, a wide variety of talents. I'm using this word talent in reference to people's ability. I don't know what all of your abilities are, but I'll bet you something. I'm not a betting man. Maybe I better say something else. But my imagination is that there's all kinds of talents, all kinds of abilities in this congregation. Now, the question is, am I using my abilities for God? Am I using my abilities for the congregation? What am I doing about the abilities that I have that could be used, that need to be used, that are essential for the life of the church? Now, how do I decide this? Well, again, as I was preparing this lesson just the other day, I sat down and started asking myself questions. And I wrote these questions down, and I thought, hey, I think I'll just read these questions to everybody. These are the things that I came up with. You can probably think of 12 more that I didn't think of. These just came to my mind. Number 1, what can I do? Number 2, what do I enjoy doing? Let me pause right here for a moment. I am a strong believer in people doing things for the Lord that they really enjoy doing. Now, in my earlier days of preaching, I used to say that everybody ought to do everything. Everybody ought to teach, everybody ought to preach, everybody ought to do this, everybody ought... No, that's not right. Because everybody doesn't have the same abilities. Everybody doesn't have the same talents. And as I was thinking about this, I thought, there are some things that I do because I have to do them. In my life, there's some things that I do because I have to do them. I've said this before. I never got a big kick out of carrying out the garbage. That just does not really interest me. I do it because I have to. But I'll tell you something. When I reach in the refrigerator and get a thing of ice cream, I really like that. I enjoy that. So the things I like, the things I don't like. I do things in both ways. But if we could just find the things that we enjoy doing and say to ourselves, how can that be used for the church? How can that be used in the work of the Lord? Responsibility, accountability. I am a steward of my talents. How can they be used? Another question I wrote down, what can I learn to do? Oh, people say, well, I can't do this, can't do this, can't do this. Could you learn? Well, maybe. I've seen people who said, I can't stand in front of a class. I can't stand in front of a congregation. I can't lead a prayer. Can you learn to? Maybe. Maybe. Then it's the congregation's responsibility to help you develop if you're willing to try to learn. What do I plan to do for the congregation? Nothing. Nothing. Well, I plan to be here on Sunday morning, but doing for that's for me. Doing for the congregation, what do I plan to do for the congregation? What talent do I have that the congregation can use? What talents do I display in my family life or my business life, my community life that could benefit the congregation? If I work in a business, what organizational skills do I have which could benefit the congregation? If I have interpersonal skills, how can these skills be used for the congregation? If I am an accountant or a bookkeeper or a professional person of some other sort, how can I help the congregation by using those things? If I like to cook, could I develop some fellowship meals with others in the congregation? If I have children, I could bring them and help them in Bible classes for others. Can I lead prayers? Can I wait on the Lord's table? Can I lead singing? Can I read Scripture publicly? Oh, there's a lot of stuff like that, folks. Let's ask ourselves some of those questions. And let's give honest, responsible answers to those things. And then finally, we're stewards of our money. Money is a topic that sometimes we don't like to talk about. My personal responsibility in reference to money. It all belongs to God. I've got a bank account with $2 in it, whatever it might be. Those are not my dollars, folks. Those are God's dollars. You say, well, no, the money I put in the plate, that's my contribution to God. No. Everything in my wallet, everything in my bank, all my assets, it's all God. The whole thing is God. I am just the trustee of it. I'm the trustee of it. Am I being a responsible trustee in reference to these things? God says to me, I give you permission to use some of my money for your own sustenance, for your own living. But don't lose sight of the fact that that's my money. Those are my assets. Use them for my benefit, not for your whims. Use them for my benefit. Well, then there's congregational money. The congregation, this congregation does not have elders. Some time ago, a group of men were selected to be what they call a serving and planning committee. They're not elders, they're not pastors, they're not bishops, what overseers and so forth. They are simply a committee of people for serving and planning. Now somebody says, where did you get that out of the Bible? Well, that's in the Bible. In the 7th chapter of the book of Acts, there was the 6th chapter, that there was a problem that they had in the Jerusalem church. And by the way, up until this time, there's no mention of any elders and the deacons or anything like that in the congregation. But they had a problem because some of the widows in the church were being neglected. Some were cared for, and then some were not cared for. And so they brought this problem to the apostles, and the apostles said, okay, I'll tell you what to do. Search out and find a committee of men. They didn't use the word committee, but that's what it is. Search out and find 7 men that we can put over this thing. Well, they did that. They searched out and they found that. There's a committee working to take care of a project that needed taking care of. Well, there's a group of men that the congregation a long time ago selected to do some of this. And it's called the serving and planning work. These men are responsible to the congregation. More than that, they're responsible to God. They are accountable to God. They are accountable to the congregation. Like I said, the Church of Jerusalem did not have elders at this time. There's no evidence of that at all. And I think this gives us an idea of the fact that a congregation can select people to do certain things, and those people are responsible to the congregation. Well, this brings up another problem. The congregation here has not had a budget, for example, for a number of years. I don't know how many years. It has not had a budget for a long, long time. This committee is now working on a budget. It's working toward providing a financial statement to the congregation regularly. Now, all of us then need to know where the money is being spent, why it's being spent, how it's being spent, how much it's being spent. Whether or not we are acting responsibly in reference to the mission of the church. What is the mission of the church? The church basically has one mission: to seek and to save the lost. Everything else the church does is subservient to this. You and I then need to know that our money is going where it can best be used, where it can best be accounted for. This is an important role that this Serving and Planning Committee has. It's a role that has tremendous responsibility to it. It's a role that has great accountability to it. And these men now are trying to say to the congregation, we want to be more accountable to you in reference to money. But we want you to be accountable also to us in support and in help. Now I'm going to make a suggestion to you. There's a difficulty along this line. For a number of years, because the contributions have not met the expenses of the congregation, for a number of years, periodically, money will be drawn out of a savings account that had been accumulated some time ago. And that saving account is going down, down, down. How can we keep that from happening? Well, I want to make a suggestion to you. Let's every one of us increase our contribution by 10%. If you want to increase it by more than that, fine. I'm suggesting this. For example, if you're giving $1, begin giving regularly $1.10. If you give $10, begin regularly giving $11. Add 10% to it. If you're giving $50, then add $5 to it. Now, that doesn't end up being a burden on anybody, probably. And just think, though, that will help to overcome some of this deficit that we're talking about. And then for the committee to find out what are things that we're spending money on that really we don't need to spend money on. Maybe people in the congregation can do these things, or maybe these things are unnecessary for some other reason. So these things have to do with stewardship, trusteeship. I am responsible to God for how I use my talent, how I use my time, how I use my money. And those who are supervising and helping in the planning and so forth, they are responsible to God about what they do for the congregation and with the congregation. And the congregation is responsible to God for the way we handle ourselves. Folks, this is an all-important, all-inclusive thing. It's something we don't like to talk about. That's the reason I said in the beginning, this is not a feel-good sermon. This is a responsibility sermon. I hope, though, that we will really take it to heart We're getting ready to begin a new year before very long. I wanted to talk about this before the new year began. So when the year does begin, we will be facing that new year with resolve and with organization and with budget and with using our talents and our abilities for the Lord. I wrote this little scenario. You're going on a trip. You've got $50,000. And you come to Jack Birch and say, Jack, I'm going on a long, long trip. Don't know how long I'll be gone. But I'm going to leave this $50,000 with you, Jack. Now, I want you to remember that you can live out of the $50,000, but I want you to invest this and work with it so that when I come back, the $50,000 will have grown. So I say, good, I'll do that. So I live a real good life. I eat at good restaurants. I enjoy the money. I enjoy people. I do entertaining. I live in a nice house. Oh, almost forgot. I'm supposed to invest this money. Well, you know, I go on, and finally you come back. You say, Jack, I want you to give an account of your trusteeship. I see, Jack, you're living in a very good house. Jack, I also see that you're driving a nice car. And Jack, I also see that you've been eating, and I can tell you credit card here, you've been eating in very nice restaurants, and you've been enjoying everything. What about the investment? Well, you see, the market was kind of bad, and the economy was bad, and you know, things like this. You gave me $50,000. I've only got $20,000 left. Now, the point is this. Have I then, as a trustee, have I been faithful to what I was charged to do? I said this is not going to be a feel-good sermon. Folks, I want every one of us to very, very seriously take a look at our trusteeship, at our stewardship, because it all belongs to God. If you are not a Christian today, there's a great opportunity for you. Oh, it's not an easy thing. I heard a fellow say one time, oh, the way is easy once you start. It's not. It's tough. It's difficult. It's demanding. But I'll tell you something. It's the most rewarding thing that you can ever think of. Now and in the world to come. If you want to become a Christian today, be baptized into Christ for the forgiveness of your sins, you're invited to come. Let's stand together and sing.